I know. Joel, can you? Thank you. Hello? There we go. Hi, everybody. If you could take your seat. Thank you so much. I'll give everybody a second to sit down. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. My name is Dr. Laura Rabineau. I'm the Deputy Director of Research here at the Rockefeller Institute. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I do want to give a couple of housekeeping notes before we begin, so bear with me. The forum is being live streamed today, so it'll be available on the Institute's YouTube channel and our website for anybody who's unable to attend today. Secondly, in consideration of everyone's experience here and online, if you could just silence your cell phones now, that would be great. I'm also going to note there are restrooms on the first floor, there's accessible restrooms on the third floor, and our fire exits are just to that side. We have a designated time for moderated discussion at the end of each panel, so if you could also hold your questions to the end, that would be great. Thank you so much. All right. Without further ado, I want to welcome our first speaker, Jonna Favreau. Jonna is a mother and a resident of Troy, New York, who, when confronted with the alarming discovery of lead present in her children's blood related to lead service lines, became an advocate for community awareness and action on environmental health. Jonna's worked to understand the impacts and the causes of lead exposure, organize with other impacted community members, and liaise with advocacy organizations to engage public officials at the state and local level in order to realize change on this issue. So I want to welcome her up now.
Hello there. Oh, good morning. And I'm just going to put a disclaimer out there that I hate public speaking. So my voice is hopefully going to even out, but it's always shaky in the beginning. I luckily don't have to do this for my day job. So when I first got this invitation, I have to admit that I had some reservations and felt undeserving of this opportunity because I'm not an activist for my day job, and I knew nothing about lead until a short time ago. But I'm standing here today doing this very hard thing for me because I recognize that I am the representation of thousands of New York State residents who are being negatively impacted by the drinking water contaminated with lead. So I'm just going to share a little bit of my story. In 2022, July, I was 9 months pregnant when I took my son in for his first routine finger prick blood lead level test, and it came back elevated. And immediately the doctors shared or reassured me that this happens all the time and it's most likely a false positive. So the next day we took him in for a blood draw, and I called every single day until I got those results back. And shockingly enough, they were elevated as well. So our pediatrician kind of swept it under the rug, saying that there was nothing they could really do until he was 12 years old, and that it was no big deal, but that I would also be receiving a letter from the county in regards to remediation and taking care of this issue. And that was the first red flag, because that didn't seem like no big deal. And I did what every parent should not do. I turned to Google. And all jokes aside, what I found was pretty alarming. Time after time, I was told that there were no safe levels of lead in a child's blood. Also, while Googling, I found that the city of Troy, where I've been calling home for the last 20 years, had received over $500,000 in funds in 2017, specifically earmarked for lead service line replacements. So that's when I called the city of Troy, and I was ignored for months. Because after that initial diagnosis, that's when we decided to get our water tested for free through New York State. And when that came back 3 times the allowable limit at 47 parts per billion, so if you're unaware, 15 is the actionable level, came back at 47. I gave those to the city of Troy, and they told me that they didn't count because it wasn't through their lab. So we had those tested through Troy, and wouldn't you know, the results came back identical. So that's when I started asking for a solution. I started asking for filters. I started asking for the pipes to come out of the ground. I even asked for a stipend to cover the cost of water because I was being told that you had to run the water for at least 3 to 4 minutes every single day, and that's just in the morning. But if you're out, you have to do that again in the evening. I was told it was 100% my responsibility and that it was up to me. And unhappy with that result, I did the next logical thing as a parent, and I went to Facebook. And that's where I asked my neighborhood community group if they too had lead in the water or if any of their children had lead in their blood and what they were doing about it. And there was one response that to that post that has me standing here today. Greg Cohen Campbell of Timber, who unfortunately couldn't make it today, he was the one that reached out to me. And he told me that there was a guy that he knew that was really into water. And I put off that conversation because I was still on maternity leave, but I finally made that connection in December of 2022, and that was with Rob Hayes, who's a panelist here today of EANY. In February 2023, we stood before the Troy City Council questioning them why the money from 2017 hadn't been spent, but why they weren't taking proactive steps to resolve this issue. And to their credit, the city of Troy has made strides over this past year. Our new mayor has committed to removing all lead service lines in her first 4-year term, which is amazing, free of cost to residents. And as a resident, this is a huge burden lifted off of our shoulders. It always makes me cry. In November, when the lead service line was removed from my home, as a mother, that relief was so profound. I cry every single time I tell somebody because I, for 2 years, had to worry about poisoning my children. But I'm not blind to the fact that this is a huge financial burden to municipalities across New York State. I am thankful for the opportunities like this one today for stakeholders coming together and problem solve and amplify my shaky voice. I will say it again for the people in the back of the room and for those online, there is no safe level of lead in a child's blood. And the only solution is a permanent one, and that is to remove all lead service lines from the ground. I know this is mandatory for municipalities across New York State to get all the service lines out by 2037, and it seems like a far time away, but it's going to sneak up on all of us. Let's all work together to find the sourcing and get shovels in the ground today. Thank you.
Bob, can you come up and make introductions?
You can do what you need.
Thank you so much.
First, thanks to Jana as a parent. I think we all appreciate it when parents get involved, especially on a public health issue this serious. And so I want to thank her, and I think she did a great job as a public speaker. So I'm Bob Megna. I'm president of the Rockefeller Institute. And again, I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank Assemblymember McDonald, Mayor Harvey. I don't see Mayor Sheehan yet. Hopefully she'll be here soon. And we have a great forum ahead of us. And I'm honored to introduce our next speaker, who unfortunately couldn't be here with us today, but I know is a leader in this issue, and that's Congressman Tonko. of the 20th Congressional District from the Capital Region. And he serves as ranking member of the Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on the Environment, on Manufacturing, and Critical Materials. He has jurisdiction over many of the issues that will get discussed today. Tonko, as we all know, has been a fierce advocate for the environment and for issues that are affecting American communities. Again, he couldn't make it with us here with us today, so he is on video, and again, we'll play that now.
I'm Paul Tonko, and I am indeed proud to represent the Capital Region in the United States House of Representatives. I want to thank Robert, Laura, and the entire staff of the Rockefeller Institute for organizing today's event. Unfortunately, with another looming federal budget deadline, I am in Washington this week. However, I am grateful for the opportunity to share a few thoughts on the nationwide effort to get the lead out of our drinking water. During my time in Congress, bringing attention to our long-neglected water systems has been a top priority of mine. Systems funding needs are massive, and we know EPA's official needs assessment has historically undercounted these needs because no one has been required to include costs associated with replacing lead service lines. Getting more resources to communities, especially those disadvantaged communities, is indeed critical. And after many years of trying, I was proud that we were able to enact the bipartisan. This bill provides historic funding for drinking and wastewater infrastructure, over $50 billion, including $15 billion to replace lead service lines. Lead service lines pose an unacceptable health threat and disproportionately impact low-income neighborhoods and communities of color. This $15 billion is an important down payment, but sadly, it will not be sufficient to replace every lead line in the country. That is why I have been urging EPA to strengthen the lead and copper rule for many years. And I was very happy to see that in November, EPA announced the proposed lead and copper rule improvements. If finalized, this rule would require that most water systems replace 100% of their lead lines within 10 years, amongst other changes to better protect public health from lead-contaminated drinking water. Certainly, more can be done. For example, I do believe these replacements should be carried out at no cost to homeowners. But the EPA proposal is a very good improvement over the status quo, and I will continue to encourage the agency to finalize a strong rule as soon as possible. Every American, regardless of race, income level, or zip code, should be able to turn on their tap and be confident that they will be supplied with clean and safe drinking water. This proposed rule gets us a little closer to that goal. The 117th session of Congress created so many opportunities and investments through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the CHIPS and Science Act. But I truly believe we will look back on all of these historic laws and say one of the greatest successes of the Biden administration was to finally get the lead out of our drinking water. There is much more work to do to make this dream a reality, and it will only be possible when we commit to robust public funding, a strong regulatory requirement, and a partnership between all levels of government. Thank you again for inviting me to participate in today's symposium. I'm ready to work with you all to supercharge our efforts to get the lead out of communities across New York. And thank you for the efforts that are made certainly by the Rockefeller Institute. Continue to inspire us with your great work and the great challenges you bring our way. Have a great discussion.
I think we all know the Congressman has been at the vanguard of a lot of these issues, so I want to thank him for doing the video. And again, it's unfortunate he couldn't be with us today. But let's dive in, I think. So we have a lot of folks with us today, and we really want to get started. I think I'm calling the first panel to the front. It may seem like a game show, but it's not. So Assemblymember McDonald, please, come up. Mayor Wheeler, please, come up. And the other members of the first panel, please come up. Oh, not Mayor Wheeler. I'm good.
You're good?
Kristine Wheeler, sorry.
Don't demote her.
I never like to put people into the political place if they really aren't there. Thanks. I think we want to get right kind of into the program as quickly as we can. And you don't want to hear from me. We want to hear from our distinguished panel. And, I think a lot of this, as a budget person for most of my life, which is why I don't wear a name tag at any of these events, is about thinking about how we fund programs like this that are pretty expensive. I mean, full lead line replacement probably is in the neighborhood of somewhere between $3 and $4 billion to fully do in New York State. That is not a trivial amount of money, but it is a significant problem that we're facing. So again, our speakers are here to address the landscape of what is available from the federal and state funding sources and how they should best be used, because there are always, in budget making and in everything else that we do, constraints we face and sacrifices we have to make. After the panelists speak, we'll have a short Q&A after the presentation. So if you could please hold off your questions until we're done, that would be great. I'm going to kick it off with Assemblymember McDonald.
Well, thanks, Bob, and good morning, everybody, and it's a pleasure to be here. And also, before I forget, only because my mind jumps in 1,000 different directions, I want to recognize the Troy City Council President, Sue Steele, who's with us today. And I know Bob had mentioned that Mayor Sheehan may be here, but you know what? If Mayor is here in the city of Albany, he's a good fill-in. So it's good to see him as well. So just as a little bit of introduction, I've been in the Assembly for the last 12 years, but prior to that, I was mayor of the city of Cohoes, right across the river from Troy, for 13 years. And all along that process, for the last 35 years, I've been a practicing pharmacist. I'm one of 2 or 3 healthcare professionals in the New York State Legislature. Let that sit for a couple of minutes out of 213 members. And I've very much enjoyed my time there. But, Jonah, a couple things. First of all, I don't like public speaking either. But what I've always found a long time ago is that when you speak from the heart like you did, it's better than any public speaker could ever do. So thank you for your comments. And it's tragic what you've gone through, but on the other hand, you've turned out to be a great advocate. And you're absolutely right about Rob Hayes. He does know a little bit about water. Rob is a constant presence, along with many others, at the legislature as we continue to push forward. And I'm going to give a little perspective because, as Rebecca knows, I was president of the Conference of Mayors back in the early mid-2000s. So of being an executive in some aspects, but also being a legislator. And like anything else, government is a creature, and it doesn't always move too quickly. And sometimes it takes a while to kind of get where you need to go. Lead in water has always been a concern. And as you know, there's always been thresholds that we've been following and monitoring. We're now at a threshold of 0, which is good. No lead in water and no lead service lines. What's been a challenge for some local government officials, and it's mostly in the established communities, right? The older ones, the ones that usually have higher tax burdens, have had people literally leaving and going to the suburbs. You got to remember, lead replacement lines, they really go back a long time. Troy's not in the Gilded Age just by accident, right? They've been there a long, long time. And that was the way water lines were established. So the way it's been for many of these cities, I'm not making excuses, just stating a matter of fact, is lead water service lines, the laterals connecting from the city lines, have always, those have been private services. And there's always been a challenge in the state of New York of when public officials should be working on private services, private properties. Fortunately, that conversation is changing now when it comes to public health. And I want to make sure there's a distinction between replacing a lateral water service versus paving someone's private driveway in the town of Colony, which has happened in the past. There's a big difference with a big distinction. We recognize that, and have recognized for a long period of time, that lead levels at anyone's body is unacceptable. I think we've become more attuned, unfortunately, for a lot of different chemicals, right? I think one talks about Hoosick Falls now, the next words to come is PFAS. It's sad that that's happened, but at the same token, just as Jonah's been a warrior for lead in water, Hoosick Falls has been a whole nother signal in regards to PFAS. Municipal officials I'm probably doing your comments, Rebecca, than anybody else's, but municipal officials are always going to be wary, and Rob knows this, we've had many conversations about how do local governments make this happen. As the Congressman pointed out, we've been very fortunate that the current administration in Washington gets it. They understand it. It's not just a Troy issue. If you ever heard of Flint, Michigan, you'll connect with that as well. Resources are coming. I'm going to go back to 2015 for a second. There was a nice young man by the name of Carl Hastie who was elected to be Speaker of the Assembly. We had a little bit of a departure with the former Speaker. And Steve Otis, Mayor of the City of Rye, and myself, we call ourselves the Mayor's Caucus in the Assembly. No disrespect to supervisors, but if you're a city mayor, right, Mayor? It's got a little extra added flavor. So we went to see Carl after he was in, and he said, Carl, we're former city officials. We know how hard it is to get the public to get really sexed up about infrastructure projects. It's next to impossible. Nobody is ever cutting a ribbon around a sewer pump station. No one is ever celebrating the fact that they replaced some old motors that cost $500,000 in the filtration plant that keep the water pumping every day. Because the public doesn't see it, they don't care. At the end of the day, they just want to turn on the faucet and expect water to come out. Just like in Cohoes this morning when I jumped in the shower and the power was out and I had no hot water. You start to really appreciate the simple things in life. Well, anyways, we said to the Speaker, we need to help local government officials get to yes. We need to let mayors and supervisors be able to say to their colleagues, we can get this done. Because there have always been revolving loan programs for probably the last 40, 50 years coming from Washington to the state. But we need to be a match. We need to be a partner. And that's where we, to the Speaker's credit, said, let's put $100 million in a one-house budget. Bob, I can't remember if you were the budget director at the time or not, because you've had a few stints at this.
If we spent a lot of money, probably not.
Probably not, yeah. I wouldn't say Bob Mojica was a big spender either, but that's beside the point. But, and we like Rob, but we put $100 million in to create the New York State Clean Water Infrastructure Grant Program, to get it started. To prime the pump is probably the best phrase. And Governor Cuomo said, this is a great idea. And he put in $100 million. And it was $200 million to get started. Now we've been hitting $500 million each and every year since that time. Additional. And Rob will correct me or give me a wink, but I think we've spent maybe about $3 million, give or take. We've spent, when I say we spent, in other words, local governments applied for, were funded, and are actually getting work done. It's a starting point. It's a good thing. We don't need to clap. This is not, it's not an advocacy campaign. It's just a fact. It's a statement of fact, which is good because it wasn't there. So the state is helping. Obviously, the federal government is helping. We have much more to do. This year, our big push is to be able to set aside $100 million. It's not easy. The budget's tight. $100 million just for lead water pipe replacement because we know the federal funds that have come down, and this I forgot, but I think it was about $113 million that came down to the state that we're pushing out. they're going to literally dry up relatively soon. And we know, just I can speak for the city of Troy, Sue knows this, we had a potential of 13,000 services that have to be examined. Hopefully we won't have that many that have to be replaced. Troy has already started, thanks to Jonah's advocacy and Rob's and Greg's. Greg's been a very strong advocate who I talk to regularly. But we have much more to do. And we want to make sure that they have the opportunity to avail themselves of any public funds in regards to grants. Now, the other item that has been interesting, and you'll probably get into this more than I will, but I've had recent conversations with the state controller's office. The question comes up is, and I've been talking to the mayor, I talked to the former mayor, I'm talking to the new mayor in Troy about this, and I'll talk to any mayor who wants to talk about this, is, well, we may have to go out and do some bonding using our authority to do this. And it's very interesting right now because there's been mixed messages coming back. And it's not because people don't want to do the work, it's a matter of we want to make sure we can do the work legally. Because as much as we're all probably well-intended here, I know there's at least one or two people in the North Country that can't wait to drop a lawsuit to say you can't do this because it's public funds. And this gets into long-term borrowing. And it's interesting, I had a very lengthy conversation with counsel in the state controller's office last week, and I think it's worth carrying through this conversation today. He said, listen, you guys did the right thing in last year's budget. You put in language that established a PPU, probable period of usefulness, that made it very clear that it's perfectly fine for local governments to replace private services because in cities, most of them are responsibility to replace the water line. Because you did the right thing there. And we see that as basically that's a state interest. So we've checked some boxes on the state side in regards to the legality of it. Because at the end of the day, interesting is in regards to when we go to borrow. And I've talked to a couple of bond councils, talked to the state's council as well, and I'm watching my time. One of the challenges is how you package your borrowing. And the borrowing has to be done right now. And I know that Dan Kildee, former mayor out in Michigan, Congressman now is working on this at the federal level. Dan Kildee is focusing on the fact that you have to be careful of the percentage of your borrowing that's used for private services. So for example, simple numbers, you're going to do $1 million borrowing. The number of allocated to local lead services can't exceed $100,000. 10% is what's in law right now. Otherwise, that borrowing is not exempt for a municipal government, is not eligible for tax exempt financing. So that the federal government, I think, is interested in fixing it. There's been some voices saying they're not interested in dealing with that. But I would hope that we would be able to get some progress on that. So that's my starting point. I'll turn it over to Kristine.
Yes.
Yeah. Because even if it was taxable debt, I think there are ways that if the state and municipalities are issuing, that it would still be substantially cheaper. And there may be ways to figure this out, to substitute taxable debt for non-taxable debt and kind of, I don't want to bog us down in a financial conversation, but I think it's something worth exploring.
Yep.
Kristine, sorry.
It's okay. So my name is Kristine Wheeler. I'm director of the Bureau of Water Supply Protection. I am not mayor. Unless I got another job today, I am not mayor. Our bureau implements the provisions related to the safe drinking, and we administer the technical component of the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. I think I didn't advance my slides as required. There we go. So we administer the technical component of the Safe Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, which includes bipartisan infrastructure legislation funds. The EFC serves as our bank on the drinking water side. They have a little more of a technical role on the clean water side. So in addition, we administer 11 distinct regulatory programs, in addition to having enforcement authority of all federal drinking water rules that are in the New York State Sanitary Code. We also administer a cooling tower program, which I know everybody thinks about drinking water. They don't think about cooling towers, and Folks are sometimes surprised to hear that comes out of our shop as well. So today I'm going to talk about some of the funding opportunities that are available for public water systems, and primarily bipartisan infrastructure legislation funding. So my first slide is kind of a lead service line overview, and this slide came from EPA, and it's part of the Drinking Water Needs Survey. So in order for us to get money under Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, it's a relatively complex process where we submit needs data from public water systems to EPA. They apply a calculation to that data that is received nationwide, and then that is how they do an allocation of funding. One of the things that's interesting about Drinking Water State Revolving Fund is that every state is entitled to at least 1% of the pot. So every state, regardless of size, whether you're Rhode Island, whether you're Montana, you are entitled to 1% of the fund. So that leaves the rest of us that are maybe a little bigger to kind of compete over the remaining portion of that fund. So essentially what that means is that we have the third greatest need in the United States for not just lead service lines, but entire drinking water infrastructure need in the nation. So we're number 3, and we get 4.67% of the federal total. This is a calculation that is determined by EPA. I will say we have some of the most experienced drinking water needs survey staff in the United States at this point in time. They are fantastic at what we do. Our data is excellent, and we have gotten historically very good cooperation from water systems. Now, this slide is interesting in a lot of respects in that you can see nationally when the infrastructure needs survey for the lead service line component was completed, we submitted our data. We, again, believe our data is very accurate and was complete. But you can see that there's maybe a couple surprises there. With Florida and Texas having a significant number of lead service lines, which was a little bit of a surprise. Mm-hmm. I think that 494,000 number for New York is a good number. But that is what calculates, what we get of that federal allocation, which is 3.97% of the national allocation for lead service lines. So, with that, we have been administering a relatively small lead service line replacement program since, I believe, 2017. And we have awarded $30 million statewide, $19.7 million has been spent to date, and we have replaced 3,266 lead service lines as part of that program. So with our staff and working with communities across the state on this program, we've learned some things. One, cost. Funding programs are a mix of grants and loans. They're insufficient to cover the entire cost of lead service line replacement for a community. Assemblymember McDonald went through a lot of those concerns that he's seen in the legislature. So property access and control is a subject of a lot of debate in the lead service line replacement world. Both inventory and replacement projects require cooperation from the owners of properties in the community and access to private property. Workforce, challenges with finding qualified contractors to complete the work, bidding requirements, Buy American, Build American provisions that are very well-intended programs that also can make it a little more difficult to find people who can complete this work, and effectiveness. And I am absolutely in favor of removing lead service lines, but I think we need to do a better job getting the public to understand that it will not eliminate all lead in drinking water. There are sources of lead, such as lead solder and brass fixtures, and while lead service line removal will absolutely be a critical component to reduction of lead, there is still lead components in fixtures within homes and businesses. Watching my time. So the bipartisan infrastructure law funding is 70% grant up to $10 million for replacement, 100% grant up to $2 million for inventory projects. For those of you who aren't familiar with the inventories, you can't replace a line if you don't know where the except for the 5 seconds I was mayor today. I do not have the authority to change federal law. This is written into the bipartisan infrastructure legislation where states can only distribute 49% of that $113 plus or minus $1 million grant or capitalization grant as grants to communities. So grants are only awarded to applicants that meet the state's disadvantaged community criteria. If you receive a grant from the state of New York under this program, you are considered a disadvantaged community. And the remainder of funding as 0% loan up to the total value of the grant minus the set-asides. So I just want to talk a little more about the inventory project. That's just the projects to identify the number and location of those. These can be a standalone project, and once the project is completed, inventory can then be used to submit a lead service line replacement project in a subsequent year. There's a lot of communities, some of whom are in this room, who have done just that. So this is kind of the, maybe it's a disappointing slide, I don't know, and this came directly from the intended use plan that is available on our website. The total capitalization grant that we apply for and receive, so New York State needs to apply for these funds from the EPA. They are not just automatically awarded to us as a program. Of the $124 million, $60.7 million is available for grants. 50.8-ish is available for interest-free financing. We cannot change that. That is part of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and so we can't shift that number around. So the total funding capacity minus the set-asides is $111.6 million, and the total project submitted, and this is in 2023, 138, was a $327 million need. So there will be some disappointed communities, and unfortunately, this is what we're up against. And this is for, oops, I think one was 20 or 22, one is 23. I think my slide's incorrect. 115.7, which is the most recent. It's a 108 project submitted and a $315.5 million need. So I apologize for my dates being incorrect here. But I wanted to include those slides so you can understand what the funding we have available to us is versus who has applied. And this is not necessarily total need, but it's who has applied to us for funding at this point. So it's some of what we have is a little unsatisfying, and unfortunately, in terms of the amount of money that's available, we will work diligently to get that money out into communities as quickly as we can. We're committed to that. I don't want to speak for my partners at EFC, but I know they are committed to that as well. But this is the pot of money that we're working with. We have a joint EFC-DOH community assistance team where we are working with communities across the state, and I think some folks from our staff and the EFC staff are out doing one of these events today. That are available to answer questions any municipalities may have on how to obtain bipartisan infrastructure or IJA-related funds. We're happy to do one-on-one consultations with communities. It's probably one of our favorite parts of the job, is being able to talk to folks and help them understand how to receive this funding. I hope the QR code works. I was really excited about it when I put it on there. But that is EFC's QR code. And if you have any questions for health in particular, we're more than happy to answer them for you. Those can go to design@health.ny.gov. So.
Thank you, Mayor.
You're very welcome.
Let's move to Marissa.
Do you mind shifting the water in the name tag, just out of my line of sight? Easier to switch.
You want this tag out?
Yeah, can it go further that way? Sorry, I just need to be able to see the screen. No, that's good. Thank you. Yeah.
I'll put this right in front of you.
Okay, and can I have the clicker? Thank you. Okay. Good morning. My name is Marissa Lieberman-Klein, and I'm here to talk about equitably funding lead service line replacements. So just a little bit about me and about Earthjustice, a little background about us, and why I'm here, if it's not really obvious. I'm an associate attorney in Earthjustice's Northeast Regional Office. I'm based in New York City, and I come at this from an environmental justice and public health angle. Earthjustice has litigated on lead in drinking water at the federal level, commented on EPA's rules on the new lead and copper rule improvements, and advocated for policy change at the state and city level. And our goal with all of that is the replacement of all lead service lines within 10 years done equitably. So that's kind of the thrust of what I'm here to talk about. Just to establish some acronyms, because you're going to see them on the slides and hear me use them. LSL is a lead service line. LSLR is lead service line replacement, and I use LCRI for EPA's recently proposed lead and copper rule improvements. So lead and copper rule improvements. As you've heard from others, EPA recently released this rule, and it makes major changes to the federal lead and copper rule, including a mandate for most water utilities to replace all lead service lines within 10 years from the rule's compliance date. We think this mandate is a big improvement over the prior rule, and we applaud EPA for taking these concrete steps to reduce lead in drinking water. There are some good things in this rule, some less good things, and some loopholes to the mandate that we've commented on not being thrilled with, but it is a complicated rule, and one thing I want to focus on today is the equitable replacement and how that can be done or not done through lead service line replacement funding. So the LCRI requires water systems to put a funding strategy in their lead service line replacement plans and include in that strategy whether and how the water system plans to assist customers who can't afford to replace the portion of the line located under their property. But that doesn't actually require the water system to assist those customers, and it doesn't address anything about the funding sources. So EPA is really kind of leaving this to the states and leaving it to the municipalities, and while that allows for flexibility, it also allows for bad acting when a municipality does not want to really commit to this. And so the LCRI allows water systems to require property owners to pay to replace the portions of the line that are located under their properties. This is called cost sharing. And there's a lot of evidence that cost sharing is inequitable and an environmental justice concern. So reports, including from the federal government, have found that in many places, people of color, renters, and families in poverty are more likely to live in homes with lead service lines. Being a person of color and being low wealth are risk factors for lead exposure and elevated blood lead levels. An EPA analysis found that cost sharing would leave low wealth households with disproportionately higher health risks, and studies show that low wealth residents are less likely than their wealthier counterparts to opt to replace the portion of the lead service line located under private property, even when they've expressed interest in lead service line replacement otherwise, most likely because they can't afford the replacement. Renters are particularly susceptible to these inequities. 36% of the US population are renters, and they're disproportionately people of color. We know from peer-reviewed studies and the example of places like Newark, New Jersey, that in areas with lots of rental properties, if cost sharing is required, landlords rarely pay for lead service lines. So this means that renters of color end up disproportionately drinking lead-contaminated water. And this gets to the access issue because in Newark, when they replaced all of their lead service lines and allowed renters to give consent to access the property, because the city was fully funding it, they had no problems with accessing everyone's line. Everybody consented and they were able to replace all of their lead service lines. So we therefore recommended to EPA that the LCRI prohibit cost sharing, and we encourage states and cities to do so as well. So I'm not as steeped in funding as some of my colleagues on the panel, but I want to kind of go over some of these just to say where we think funding should come from, if not from the individual property owner. So first, we've been talking a lot about the federal funds from the bipartisan infrastructure law, and our estimate is that New York's going to get about $2.6 billion of the funding over 5 years. I'm sure someone can tell me if that's not exactly correct. And while that's definitely not enough to replace all of New York's lead service lines, it's a big boost. It is, a start. There's also money set aside within the Drinking Water Revolving Fund, and the bipartisan infrastructure law has technical assistance funding for planning and outreach. And there are also some smaller federal sources of funding that I've listed on this slide. I'm not going to go through these programs in detail, but the point I'm trying to make is that there's federal money out there in different programs, and water systems should exhaust these sources of funding and financing first, no matter how else they're going to pay for lead service line replacement. States also need to make sure that these funds get to where they're needed most, and that might mean tweaking programs in any ways they can and about how funding is allocated. So an example of where this didn't happen was in Mississippi, where the state government actually kept Jackson from getting needed federal funding, and residents couldn't get safe drinking water. So, this is something we just want to flag for states to keep a check on. There's also state funding. Yes, we need more money from Congress, but there's some state funding available. So New York State has the Clean Water Infrastructure Act that Assemblymember McDonald was discussing. And since 2019, that has received about $5 million annually in new funding. However, unfortunately, despite the program's success and being significantly oversubscribed every year, the governor proposed cutting this funding in half in the 2024-2025 budget. New York's estimated need for replacement of lead service lines, as we've discussed, costs about $2.5 billion. So now's not the time to be cutting clean water funding, just the opposite. So New York needs to step up and invest to protect clean water and address lead service lines. We've joined organizations across the state to oppose the cut to the Clean Water Infrastructure Act and to urge the governor and the legislature to fund it at $600 million, with $100 million earmarked specifically for replacing lead service lines. So we've also heard a little bit about using ratepayer funds to pay for lead service line replacements. And we're a national organization, and we've heard from water systems in many places across the country, including here in New York, that they're prohibited from using ratepayer funds to pay to replace lead service lines located under private property. We're a legal organization, we've got a bunch of lawyers, so we looked into it, and our opinion is that water rates can be used to pay for lead service line replacements, regardless of who owns the property that the line is located under, because it furthers this public policy of protecting public health. In New York, there's a case from New York's highest court that says that water rates can be determined in accordance with public policy goals, not just economics. Additionally, there's a 2019 study out of Harvard that looked at this court decision, the New York State Constitution, and other court decisions, and determined that there was no prohibition on using ratepayer funds for full lead service line replacement across properties. In addition, in their comments on the lead and copper rule improvements, the New York State Office of the Attorney General agreed with the Harvard study, and they also added that the New York Public Service Commission, which regulates privately owned water utilities, specifically allowed rate revenues to pay for replacing lead service lines located on private property, indicating that they believe that public utilities can do the same. And reducing lead exposure provides community benefits. I listed some of them on this slide. So that does protect public health and is a public policy goal, not just, again, the same as replacing, repaving somebody's driveway. Given that I spent the beginning of this presentation talking about the burden cost-sharing places on low-wealth households, I'm sure some of you are thinking, wouldn't using ratepayer funds increase water rates, and wouldn't that also burden these households? That is a possibility, but that's why we believe that water systems absolutely need to exhaust all other funding and financing first before raising rates. Additionally, if water systems do need to use ratepayer funds, there are ways to structure rate systems more equitably, including capping low-wealth customers' bills and offering bill discounts to low-wealth customers, among other things. Even without restructuring rate systems, spreading out the cost over the entire customer base is still less burdensome for low-wealth households than cost sharing is, and it solves the problem of landlords not being willing to spend money to benefit their tenants. The last thing I wanted to mention is tax-exempt bonds. I know we've heard about that a little bit before. Both Newark, New Jersey, and Denver, Colorado use this approach. Denver is in the middle of it. Newark did it successfully. And Newark also used the fees from their local port authority to repay the bonds, not ratepayer money. So there are creative ways to do this. Madison, although they didn't bond, they used funds from leasing land for cell phone towers to pay for lead service line replacements. So, we encourage water systems to get creative and to figure out ways to fund this other than billing homeowners to replace the portion under their property, which is unlikely to result in full lead service line replacement. Thank you so much for your time and for having me here today to speak on this topic.
Thank you. Rebecca, why don't we? I guess I need a microphone to say, Rebecca, would you please? It's your turn.
Thank you. Okay. So good morning, everyone. My name is Rebecca Ruscito. I'm one of the 3 staff attorneys at the Conference of Mayors, and I guess I'm going to bring a little of the heavy today in terms of the legal dynamics that are at play here, right? I am not a finance expert. I am not an expert in funding, but I hope to be somewhat of an expert in what local governments can do from a legal administrative perspective in terms of managing their water systems. So just a little bit about NYCOM if you're not familiar with us. We are a nonpartisan volunteer membership organization. Our members are cities and villages. We have sister associations with the Association of Towns and the Association of Counties representing those municipal governments. My members, of course, our cities and villages are the oldest municipalities in New York State, so therefore have these problems more than our friends in the towns. So Mayor Sheehan, Mayor Murphy, right? Harvey, I'm so sorry. Being our members, I guess I should have gotten that right. But obviously, Assemblymember McDonald was a previous NYCOM president. So we come at this issue from a perspective of educating our members as to what they can do from the legal perspective, right? I think all of our members, all of our city and village members want to replace lead service lines, right? That is certainly the objective. What is, I think, a hurdle for us is how to do it in a legally appropriate way. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the restraints that we have here in New York State. So primarily we have this gift and loan provision of the New York State Constitution, which prohibits the expenditure of public funds for any private purpose, right? So our driveway example, right? We can't fix someone's driveway. We can't fix someone's driveway even if they're going to repay the local government for that work, right? This is a provision that's there. It's like as I mentioned, it's a constitutional provision, so it's not just something that the state legislature can enact a different state law to overrule, right? Really changing this would require a constitutional amendment. So to that end, let's look at what a proper public purpose is, right? So there have been various cases, legal opinions that have really addressed this question. What is a proper public purpose and when can a municipal government expend public funds for that, right? Private benefit can be incidental to the expenditure of those funds. So in the case of our driveway example, let's say, if that driveway repair or maybe the sidewalk repair was going to benefit an entire system, drainage system, for instance, there are Attorney General opinions about this or comptroller opinions about this. If that repair was going to benefit the entire drainage system, that would be an appropriate expenditure of those public funds. Because while that private benefit is helping that individual, the collective good is present, right? So we're actually investing those public funds in order to benefit the entire system. I think one of the issues here, while lead service line replacement is very apparently a public good, we haven't had any case law or opinions really look at this specific question of can we invest public funds that benefits only that property owner. So if, let's say, that driveway was made out of well, I guess driveways are already made out of toxic stuff. But let's say we were saying that then we're gonna fix this. We know that PFAS is terrible and PFAS is in everything. Can we really replace that driveway even though we know that that is a toxic thing for us collectively? Maybe that's not the best example, but I think that's what we're looking at or what we're struggling to identify, right? So until this decision or until this issue is brought to the Court of Appeals, how can local governments expend these public funds to replace the service line? And maybe I should go back and I know that it was touched upon, but municipal water systems, right? The municipal owned side of the system is everything basically up until the curb, right? Until the property line. Of course, in New York State, property lines vary. Sometimes it's the middle of the road, sometimes it's at the curb stop. So that can also be a question and can be problematic when we're trying to answer and address these issues. But generally it's going to be that lateral, the side, this part of the system that goes from the main to the home. And that's the portion of the system that we are really talking about. That's the lead service line. That's where we have potentially an issue of financing the replacement. So let's see, what do I have as my next slide? So work on private property is prohibited except in certain instances. I mentioned if it has an incidental private benefit, that is all right. There are provisions of the village law that specifically address issues of public safety when the local government can, or the village government in that instance, can enter the private premises to perform work and then charge that work back onto the property owner. I would imagine the towns have similar provisions. The city law isn't as specific. Cities are primarily creatures of their city charter, so the city charter might give that that authority to the city in order to go onto the property and perform the work and then charge the property owner the cost of that repair. But we do have this concept or this theory, this legal premise that in the event of an emergency endangering the public health, when there is going to be this great public benefit, we can go onto the property and abate that emergency circumstance. One of the questions, of course, is this an emergency? Obviously, yes, right? This is an emergency. My members certainly understand and believe that. It's a matter of who is going to litigate. Now, I know we're being live streamed, so I don't know if I should say this, but so I don't want any of my members to be sued, but I would like to see this seen through to the Court of Appeals. I might be willing to take that risk if I was a municipal attorney advising my client, right? I'm not. I sit in a different capacity as an attorney for a membership organization, but if I was advising my client, I might want to take that risk to say that we have enough hooks to hang our hat on. And that's, I think, one of the things I want to focus on in my last slide here, right? So I know that Dr. Laura had 3 primary considerations to really examine in her white paper on this issue. Funding source, if the replacement is a proper public purpose, and if the private benefit is incidental enough. And I think there are plenty of legal decisions, right, that would support this. I think attorneys can certainly make this argument. I think attorneys can make the opposite argument. That's why we're attorneys and not finance experts, right? Or sometimes, right? Sometimes we're both, but not me. I'm not both. So I think we have to think about that. I think the relevance of the funding source, right? So when the municipal government is acting as sort of a pass-through, I think the city of Newburgh has, and the mayor will be speaking about this, has a system in which they are able to provide those public funds as a pass-through entity to the property owner, right? The issue that arises is when those funds become indistinguishable from the municipal funds, right? So when I'm advising our members as to how to properly procure something, which we have to do as a local government, we have to follow Joint Municipal Law Section 103 whenever we are bidding a public works project, which this is certainly would qualify as, right? We have specific procedures we have to follow. So that's one of the considerations I have. So funding source is important. We need to consider that, but that might not be dispositive of whether or not the public funds can be used in a particular instance. It depends on how, right? The replacement being a proper public purpose, again, I've just addressed that. I think there are enough arguments to be made to support that type of argument. And also, I think we need to think about statutory authority. As the Assemblyman mentioned, the legislature did authorize this PPU for lead service line replacement, which is, I think, a great start. It just is a question of another hook to hang our hat on, right? To say, this is something we can do. This is the policy of New York State. This is what New York State believes to be important. And so we're going to rely on that. So, I think it's an ongoing conversation. I think my members don't want to foist the expense of this onto property owners either, but it would become, a consideration of what what would happen to those rates. Would rates need to be increased in order to finance the replacement of all these lead service lines? And that's all I have. Thank you.
So I'm going to open it up to questions and answers, but let me ask a question if I can. Mayor, Kristine, can you?
I still respond to that, just so.
I was thinking he was talking to you.
Yeah, I thought it was too.
I apologize to Assemblyperson McDonald. That 300, the money that you put up there that was being allocated where there was 300 million of need and a much smaller amount available. How much of that money has actually gone out, and what's the term you think it's going to go out over?
So we have not closed, and we being, us in conjunction with the FC, have not closed on a lead service line project to date. We have complete applications, I believe, for about a half a dozen plus or minus communities that will go to the EFC board for closing, but none to date.
Okay. So again, we are live streaming, so I'll be a little careful. But in past programs like this, as we allocate money, there's always the possibility, once that gets allocated over time, that we can revisit the need versus the amount of money that's available.
I'm not sure I entirely understand the question, but yes.
So you have 110, you haven't allocated. It's going to take you time to allocate it. When you get near the end of when you've allocated it and you still have need, people can revisit the fact that we probably need more.
We can revisit that, and as time goes on, and when we see who completes full applications for this funding, we'll move down our list, and I think within the next few years, once we get more projects underway, I think we'll have a better idea what the total amount of need is. There's some potential there. For those people who know me, I'm not glasses half full, but there's some potential there, with some reallocation of funds, from the federal government. We have been asked to resubmit on the needs survey for lead service lines, and there could be some potential, for us to increase funding, but there could also be some potential that funding decreases as well. We're constantly evaluating, what we have to give out, and we're reviewing that against our applications.
Thanks. Not to be Pollyannish about it, but I've lived through a life where let's use the money up and then revisit the issue when we get there. It's probably not the right way to do it, but it's often what happens, I think. Then I have one more quick one. Rebecca, not being a lawyer, but a finance kind of person, the municipalities couldn't take a more proactive role in saying, we're requiring you to remove these lead service lines, therefore it becomes more of a municipal finance issue, and so we're going to help in the financing of that process? How does that work?
So you're asking, can a local government say, you property owners have to replace your...
It's a health and safety issue, you have to do it.
I can't think of any reason why you couldn't, as a local government, do something like that, although I reserve the right to change my mind. I can't think of any rationale, but what council is going to do that to the voters that elect them, right? I mean, I'm not an elected, unlike my colleague Kristine. I'm not an elected person, so I don't have to think about things like that. But certainly that would be a possibility, and I think that could be an action that a local government would want to take. A city like Troy that is going to be moving forward, right? To say we're going to do this, and I do think adopting local legislative authority, granting the municipal government the authority to proceed with this is a great first step in creating the legal framework in which we can then proceed, right? So I might not I might not do such a stick approach in that type of instance, but I might say as a local government advising my members to say, I would adopt a local law authorizing us to proceed with these types of changes, replacements. I think another important element of this is the liability that can be incurred by the municipal government if they are going to be the ones that are performing the work. But I think that there's probably, well, I won't say easily, but addressed by an agreement with the property owner.
Thanks, Rebecca. I wasn't trying to put you on the spot there. But I think it's an interesting question, right? When does the health and safety needs of the community cross over to the private property rights of the owner?
I just want to actually, just because it's been great listening to all three of the other co-panelists, there's a couple things to keep in mind. First of all, you're talking about almost a $200 million gap. You're right, it may take some time to get there. However, and I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, and I forgot we were being live streamed, so I'll be careful what I say. But I think last year, if I remember correctly, of the 900 bills we passed, one of them was actually requiring local governments to actually do a survey of their lead replacement lines, because that's another one of those unfunded mandates that we like to do. Sorry, Rebecca. But it's one that's important because, once again, putting all the advocacy and drama aside, at the end of the day, we're now talking about implementation. So you need to identify what your needs are first, so you can determine what the requirement's going to be financially. But another point that both Marissa and Rebecca touched on, maybe from different perspectives, the last thing the counsel from OSC said to me is, you know what we really need? We need a good lawsuit. We need a good lawsuit to clarify this. I know the different advocacy groups, we talk regularly about this issue, and everyone's making a compelling argument why we can do it, which is good. But like I said, from a municipal perspective, we want to know certain what the outcome could be, because we don't want that to impede, because it just frustrates the public. And the last thing that was brought up by a bond counsel, because the OSC counsel said, quite frankly, it's up to the bond counsel to make that decision. Now, bond counsel, for those who don't know, works for a lot of these private firms, and they can interpret things either depending on how they're being pushed or depending on how they view things, right? I talked to Troy's bond counsel, who thought it was very interesting and is very interested in the topic. And he says another thing that you should think about, which I'm assuming local governments are thinking about, but Rebecca can correct me if I'm wrong, is, when we did it, in Cohoes, we replaced water lines back in the mid-2000s as part of the larger project. We replaced the whole water line, and there's lead services, so we just said, hey, we're going to replace yours, but we got a permission to access their property, and we also had them sign off that we're not responsible for the new pipe going forward. And he said, our local government's doing this now when they're doing this, when they're replacing the lines. And I honestly don't know the question, because quite frankly, you're not buying the line for life. You're replacing the line to protect lives, right?
Right.
It's an interesting thing. And NYCOM does an excellent job. The other associations do, but I'm biased. They do an excellent job of making sure.
Get bond counsels on many sides of the same issue.
Yeah.
I want to thank everyone and open it up to questions from the group.
Hi, thank you all for coming here. Your insight is quite valuable, and thank you for the work that you're doing. One of the things that New York has that's rather unique amongst the states is the right to clean water and the Bill of Rights in our Constitution. Can you talk about how the Green Amendment might fit into this issue and what could be used to strengthen it to be more effective?
Without having done a deep dive into this, so again, lawyers reserving the rights to change their mind on the issue, I do think that that helps bolster the argument that, lead service line replacement, even under private property, is a real public health concern. It is in line with public policy, and you can use, public funding for it. And I think, if you were going to bring a lawsuit, bringing it with an ERA claim, environmental rights amendment claim, would be very helpful to clarify how that works. I think there are some challenges there with how courts are starting to interpret that amendment, but I do think that, it helps bolster this argument that it is a public health concern that should be, used with ratepayer funds or public funding, and the homeowner shouldn't pay for it.
Yeah, I would just echo that too, right? Another tool in your toolbox. You would add that to your resolution that is authorizing your local government to proceed, if that's what the local government wanted to do.
Hi, thank you. I'm wondering whether there are any discussions around aligning this major infrastructure effort in a lot of urban neighborhoods with another effort that probably needs to be done along the same time frame, which is installing thermal energy networks, and whether there are any synergies in terms of the infrastructure disruption as well as possible other funding streams that could be tapped to move both projects forward?
That's an interesting view, and I don't disagree with it, because if you're going to disrupt the neighborhood, disrupt it once, right? And make sure, you know, if not, I mean, Troy obviously is moving forward with a geothermal proposal, but they're having their challenges. I actually have a meeting this afternoon about that. But that is an interesting perspective. In other words, if you're going to be going in and doing all this work, you know, we don't need to replace the asphalt, the top coat twice. It's a very good perspective. I don't think as many communities have jumped into geothermal, because but I personally think it's the area we should be spending a lot of, no pun intended, energy on trying to figure out.
I think local governments could do something like that locally, right? So I know that the city of Albany has a local law or policy in place that when you do open the road, or when you are attempting to for any type of repair, that you try to coordinate it with other repairs. So certainly that could be an approach that the local government can take on its own.
John, I could just address that a little bit. As the Water Commissioner in the City of Albany, Katie McKittrick with me is our program manager for the lead program. We have tied our program in, for example, mandating a replacement. If there's a leak or a defect on the water service, we require now, with the revision to the code, that to replace the whole lead line. And as part of that program, the Albany Water Board will reimburse the homeowner, property owner, a portion of that replacement, particularly if it was the whole service, it's a couple $1,000. If it's the inside half, it's $1,000, and we would do the outside half. And we also coordinate, I think John talked about water main replacement. We replace a water main that's $100, no cost to the homeowner.
No cost.
That's part of that program. And we collaboratively with our Department of General Services on the road repaving program. We try to get ahead of that. If they're going to repave a whole road with a full reconstruction, we may do a water main. We also want to replace the lead services as part of that to try to, again, mitigate that, because we have it opened up for 5 years. So.
Nothing's more precious, though, if you just pick a nice road and National Grid comes in and tears up the whole thing. So the coordination, because you have a lot of people competing for that underground.
We make a lot of friends with our DGS folks. We have a massive water main break right after they pave the road, too.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, was there one more question? If not, thank you. I want to thank all our panelists, the mayor especially, for coming today. I thought it was really a great panel. And again, I want to thank them, and let's give them a round of applause.
Day. Our second panel is going to explore further the real-world experiences, best practices, and challenges that localities encounter in prioritizing funding and implementing these essential replacements. Our panelists will also share insights and strategies for identifying how to best streamline replacements while addressing the needs of communities most at risk through the creation of equitable models for lead service line replacements. First up, I would like to welcome Gabrielle Burton-Hill from Newburgh. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Oops. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Most of us are familiar with Martin Luther King regarding civil rights, but recently I read a quote in which he was talking about environmental justice and how doesn't matter where you are, where you live, who you are, we all have the right to clean water, clean air, and clean land. So I just wanted to lift up Martin Luther King today. If I had to put a title on my conversation today, it would be Led, the Silent Family Disruptor. This is my firstborn child. She will be 27 years old next week. In this picture, she was 9 months old, her first Christmas, and about 6 months after this, I decided to go back into the workforce. And the daycare provider required a blood lead test, which I had not heard of that before, but we did it. And unfortunately, my daughter's lead was extremely high. It was 42 micrograms per liter, and that's near fatal. So I got a call from our Orange County Department of Health, who I can imagine when they saw that number, how frightened and anxious they were to get my daughter the help that she needed. So they called and they said I needed to get my daughter to the hospital immediately. And I said, I don't drive. I said, but I'll call a taxi. And they said, call us back and we'll have a police escort you if the taxi is taking too long. And at that point, I was wrought with fear because I had no idea what that meant. Like, if you're gonna send the police to my house to take my child to the doctor, to the hospital, what's going on? So we get to the hospital, triage, and then they begin to explain to me what's going on, that my daughter needed to be chelated. What is that? She needs to be hooked up to a machine through her hand for 7 days to wash her blood. So again, we're talking a 8-month-old baby who does not want to sit still, who is afraid and doesn't know what's going on. And so for 7 sure that she was okay, and to assist the medical staff any way that I could with this small child. And I call it the silent family disruptor because I didn't see it coming. There are no signs, there's no cough, there's no runny nose. There's no complaining of headaches or anything. It affects babies in such a way where their brains are not developed yet. We know the neurological studies, so I don't want to bore you with that. But there's nothing for me to see. There's no discoloration of the eyes, fingernails, anything. But it also disrupts the family because we didn't know at that point where the lead came from. Was it the dirt? Was it the water? Like, so because we live in an old city, it could be any number of things. So until we find out where it originated from and how it got into her body, I was not allowed to go back into my home. So at that time, and we tested the dust, the paint, the water, the soil outside. So a family who was removed from their home could go into a nice place. It was a nice 2-bedroom apartment. I didn't have to pay any of the bills with it. The county took care of everything, and that program is important. So we were able to stay there, I think, around 90 days as they monitored my daughter's lead levels drop. So I'm totally grateful for that program, and if we're gonna allocate some funding in addition to the infrastructure, let's think about how we can make families' lives less disruptive. So Raji came home. I'm lucky my daughter did not have a lot of the developmental problems that we thought she was gonna have. And she went on and actually graduated high school a year early and went into nursing, and she works at St. Luke's Hospital. She wants to give back. She doesn't remember that, but she remembers me telling her about her being in the hospital and the care that she received. So that triggers some kind of love for wanting to give back to folks. A very high percentage of our children living in older cities, as my mayor will talk about probably later, like how old our city is and the work that needs to be done. Dating back to, the infrastructure is hundreds and hundreds of years old. Newburgh, the very first president, lived in our city for a little while. We have there, and I wonder if our dear president would be advocating for Newburgh.
That's right.
So in growing up in Newburgh, many of the families own their homes, and they were passed down from generation to generation. What happened, it would be out quicker, but now we're, instead of 70% owners, we're 72% renters. And a lot of the children that live in cities, poor, lower income communities, are at the mercy of their landlord when work has to be done. And part of what the Newburgh Clean Water Project, our mission, part of our mission has to be to make sure that people who would be left out of conversations get the information that they need so that they can be aware, so that they can hopefully help their families become more safe. The lead replacement line, sorry, let me go back. So this is my granddaughter, my daughter. I'm sorry, sweetie, I almost forgot. I almost forgot, and I have 3 minutes now. Okay, so let me do the slides. So the reason why I wanted to show you my granddaughter, you know, in addition to her being so damn cute, darn cute, oops. Yeah, she was born with a deformity. She was born without her left forearm, so she has the elbow, but she was born without her left forearm, and that doesn't stop her, does it, Mayor? She's everywhere, doing everything. She's 8 years old now. And doing some research regarding lead and the effects that it has and how it does stay in the body, it can hide in bones. It was brought to my attention that maybe because of the lead that was in my daughter, that my granddaughter has this deformity. So I researched both family backgrounds, and no one has ever had any deformity on her father's side nor her mother's side. So this is not to show shame or blame. This is just to really set a fire under who needs fire lit, that the money is about state and across this country. And we want to give our children the best opportunity to succeed, because they can think better, they can make better choices. So I was in the process of getting my process, right?
Absolutely,
so I was able to, on a Monday night while we were in city, I got the water line was being taken care of. But I brought this because just imagine this as a straw. Would any of us want to drink out of this? And so, you know, Wayne was kind enough to give it to me, and I was like, wow, we just don't. Okay, good, that's my slides. And I just want to say this one last thing. Funding is of the utmost importance. If not now, when? And if not us, who? Thank you.
Thank you so much for that in your family experience. I want to next welcome Mayor Torrance Harvey of Newburgh. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you also to Gabrielle Burton-Hill and everyone that's a part of the Newburgh Clean Water Project, which is a non-for-profit organization that does wonderful, wonderful work in our community. And it's the collaborating partners like that that really push the needle forward. And thank you for that wonderful testimony. She's very active in at all our council meetings and calls me quite a bit on the telephone when things go wrong and when things go right, because she's the first person to give props to and thank me and the city council and the city government for all that we do. So I want to, I'm very happy to be here at such an auspicious, especially for the matter here at the Rockefeller Institute of Government. I have a city overview of our water system. And I think I hit the green button. There we go. So lead line replacement program. Again, I'm Mayor Torrance Harvey for the mayor of the city of Newburgh, New York. And when we look at the city of Newburgh and its water system overview, first of all, I want to say we are roughly, according to the 2020 census, 28,800 some odd residents. We are close to 4 square miles, about 60 to 66 miles north of New York City. We like to say that we are the best river city of the Hudson Valley on the west bank of the Hudson River. And we are the in-between New York City and our state capital, Albany, New York. Shout out to Mayor Kathy Sheehan. She and I see each other at a lot of events and conferences. But anyway, about 30,000 customers are served through 6,675 water service connections. We are also the backup water system for the neighboring town of New Windsor, about 28,000 pumps, and 75 miles of water mains ranging from 4-inch water mains to 30-inch water mains throughout the city, and more than 800 fire hydrants, approximately 3,500 gate valves. In 2023, our drinking water production was roughly 1.2 billion gallons of water, required sampling for lead in the water service system. Drinking water source. The city of Newburgh's primary drinking water obtained source from the city-owned reservoir, otherwise known as our Washington Lake. And until May of 2016, when I first got elected, and I was the one that was pushing the issue on the inside, because as soon as I got elected city council in 2015 and then got seated, all these phone calls were coming in about possible contamination in Washington Lake, PFAS. So I rang the bell, and I'm proud to have done that. When PFAS was discovered in our Washington Lake in 2016, the city has relied on its backup supply of water source consisting mainly from the New York City Catskill Aqueduct. The city of Newburgh is also proudly an environmental justice community, and that's very important to us. The environment and ecological matters are a priority. We look at it as public safety and the safety of future generations. Once again, a population of 28,866 people over 3.8 square miles, one of the highest density cities in the United States. Approximately 75% Black, African American, and or Hispanic, somewhere between 75 and 80%. Those numbers are debatable. And then 25.5% are white, approximately 20% foreign born, 26.5% living below the poverty line. Initially, we thought it was 75 to 25 in terms of our renter to homeowner ratios. But recently, we did some research last night. Because we're growing with new homeowners, 66% renters versus 34% homeowners. Yep. So that ratio is changing due to human migration. The City of Newburgh lead service line inventory and replacement program is leading the way, and we're proud to say that in New York State. The City of Newburgh initiated one of the leading lead line service replacement programs known as the LSLRP in New York State. City will cover up to $10,000 in the LSLR cost. And the first round in 2017 to 2018, 79 water service lines were replaced, costing up to about $698,015. The second round, which was started in 2021 to present, the city has allocated $1 million of our ARPA funds, the American Rescue Act. So we thought, again, this was a priority, and public safety is always our #1 priority, even when it comes to clean water. And so we allocated at the City Council $1 million from our ARPA fund. 122 service lines were replaced, equating to $1,119,442 to date. 201 lead service lines have already been replaced, coming to a grand total of $1,817,57. I'm sorry. And the average cost of all these 201 lead service line replacements, the average cost is $9,042 on average per line replaced. In 2022, the City of Newburgh City Council allocated nearly $600,000 to purchase a VACCON hydro excavator to undertake a complete lead service line inventory as it was required by the 2021 lead and copper rule revisions. Lead service line inventory is being developed using the following methods: excavating and visual inspection at the curb valve on both sides buried service line, records research to confirm the lead lines that were already replaced with copper lines, artificial intelligence using our computer technology, artificial intelligence to help predict the materials in the service lines for areas that cannot be visually verified. And I want to say something about the VACCON hydro excavator, a very, very important tool for us to do this important work. The impact of the lead service line inventory requirements requires public water systems to complete a lead service line inventory by October 2024. That is a very tall task, very arduous and expensive, and we are on par to meet this deadline, and we're very proud of that. Secondly, the city initially and immediately verified all water service connections to schools, daycares, and they were copper in compliance with the proposed LCRI. When we look at the inventory, we know that that is required at this point by the EPA, and we know there's a proposed law that hasn't gone into effect to replace all the lead service lines throughout the entire city. And we're looking forward to that with a very big price, as was mentioned with the panelists before. The city began its inventory of its 6,675 service connections in 2022, well in advance of the proposed LCRI deadline. Recently, we applied for and received $968,000 in grant funding from New York State's Department of Health for inventory assistance. And all those here from the New York State DOH, thank you very much for that. We really appreciate that. The impact of the proposed lead line, I got 21 seconds. The copper rule, I guess I'm going to say with this matter, the city property owners own their water service lines from the main to the meter, and we need clarification, as it was mentioned on the previous panel, and then we want to make sure that we can cover that. And then the service line replacement equity analysis, which is with the Environmental Policy Innovation Center. Maureen Cunningham is here with us. She and I were in D.C. Last year at the White House on this matter, making sure that we prioritize the neighborhoods that are low income, living at or below the poverty line, that we prioritize those neighborhoods first. Thank you very much. And I did not get to all my slides, but thank you.
All right, we'll now hear from Harrison Watkins of the New York State Laborers Organizing Fund.
Can you pass the clicker? No, thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you so much for having me, and I just want to say special thank you to Rob Hayes of Environmental Advocates for leading the push for clean water funding statewide, which we're firmly behind. And just a little bit first about who I am and who the laborers are. So my name is Harrison Watkins. I work for the New York State Laborers Organizing Fund. We're affiliated with the Laborers International Union of North America. It's a construction union of 500,000 members in the US and Canada. And as the organizing fund in New York, we represent about 44,000 union construction workers across New York State. So the first thing I want to say is just to shout out the City of Albany's lead service line replacement. My neighbor just had it done, and Mayor Sheehan, she was thrilled with the program, that she was able to get a grant to help with the replacement. And so, I just want to say that, to see that in action, it was great. And she was able to get it done, and she had to have other work done for a broken pipe, but it's necessary and it's everywhere. So just some further background on the Laborers Union and water. So one of the things that we do as a construction union is we build and maintain water infrastructure. We know that we've seen historic federal investment in clean drinking water and lead pipe removal. There are great labor standards on this work. And just to give you a sense of what's involved in this kind of work, we've talked a lot about the need, I think, and there's a lot of moral clarity around the need to get lead pipes out of the ground, get lead out of the drinking water. It couldn't be clearer. I have 3 young children, and it's very important to me to have, lead-free drinking water in the city of Albany and everywhere in New York State. But I just want to talk a little bit about the work that's involved, right, as part of this. As you see in the picture, labor in the hole there. So, this work involves excavation. It involves pipe fitting. You're in the mud and muck. You're in trenches, right? Anything involves trenches over 5 foot deep, which requires shoring up of the trench. So I'm talking about this just to emphasize, the sort of the different angle of this work. So this work needs to be done, but it requires actual people to do it, right? And so, in there, I want to talk about an opportunity in the push of funding to do this work. There's also an opportunity to create well-paying union jobs in this work, right? And so, and also an opportunity to get folks who are most affected by this problem into the workforce. And so just to talk a little bit more broadly about where the laborers have worked on water infrastructure projects. So all over New York State certainly, and we actually have one of our locals in Newark, New Jersey, did extensive work with the city there and partnered with the city to engage neighborhood residents and get them into the local and join the unionized workforce there as part of the city's replacement program there. And we were excited to do that. And we also do, of course, wastewater and tunnel work all across the state. So just to give everyone context of the tradespeople that are doing this kind of work, right? So one of the aspects that I want to talk about that's important with this work is that it creates an opportunity for bringing people into the union. There are historic investments in construction funding to the infrastructure law, but we need more funding for clean water, lead-free, getting the lead out, so to speak. But as laborers, we sit ready to take those folks in and through and educate them through our training and apprenticeship programs. Currently, as an international union, we invest about $100 million a year in our training funds across the U.S. and Canada. And as an example, our local training school here that's located in Glenmont at Labor's Local 190, the current training director is, when he was in the field, he performed the work as a pipe foreman. So that's the type of tradesperson who would be running the job. Let's say you need to get your lead service line replaced. You have someone there who's saying, like, okay, here's how this needs to work, here's how that needs to work, right? And that requires a lot of knowledge and experience and hands-on training, and that's something that we can offer. And so one of the things that I wanted to say is that as this work goes out, it's important and critical to make sure that people from disadvantaged, marginalized communities are connected with opportunities, right, after they have borne the cost of neglect for this work, to set them up with opportunities in the unionized trades, like the laborers. And on the slides here, we have 2 examples of tradespeople that have joined the laborers through our apprenticeship programs. And one, has joined in the renewables area, and the other has joined as a general laborer, but both success stories in terms of joining the trades. And so the last thing I wanted to talk about is, for getting led out through a labor perspective, is that there are existing pathways in for folks who are part of these neighborhoods, who live here and work here. And again, I want to emphasize that our members live here and work here and drink the water, and and want and need lead-free water as much as anyone else. But I want to talk briefly about our apprenticeship readiness and pre-apprenticeship programs. We may not have any experience with that otherwise, and specifically a program that we've been running in Buffalo that focused on renewables, which is able to pay people $400 a week for a 4-week apprenticeship readiness program, get hands-on training, including this type of training that you would need for water infrastructure work, and then to be directly indentured into the local there. So in our first round last year, we had 12 people, all 12 people who initially signed up, the cohort, successfully complete the program, and currently 8 of those 12 are working full-time as apprentices in Labor's Local 210 in Buffalo. So this is a program model that we were very excited about, and to expand across the state, we're in whatever form that we can. This one is focused on renewables through a partnership with a renewable developer, and an emphasis on getting folks from disadvantaged communities into the laborers. And we work closely with community partners like CEO, the Center for Employment Opportunities, who assists folks who have been incarcerated, and with job placement and job training, and so it's a pathway to employment there. But I just wanted to draw between create jobs for people that need them the most, and laborers stand ready, to help with that effort in whatever way we can. And I'd be remiss, as one of my colleagues said, he's like, you got to say every time you flush your toilet or turn on the tap, you got to thank a laborer for making that happen. But I want to emphasize that the role that laborers and all other tradespeople play in building the infrastructure that we use every day. So that's an important part of this effort as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I know we've heard a lot about who is and is not a mayor today, but now I want to welcome our very own mayor, Kathy Sheehan of Albany. Welcome, Mayor.
Great. Thank you so much. And I just want to echo my thanks to Gabrielle for really setting and framing this conversation in a really impactful way. As mayors, when we face a challenge, we're usually focused on how do we get things done. And one of the things that I've learned in my time as mayor, usually through the mistakes that I've made, as opposed to just knowing these things intuitively, but often when you have a challenge, you look at it and you think, is this a technical challenge or is this an adaptive challenge? And most challenges are both. But when we're talking about getting lead out of our water system and out of our homes, it isn't an adaptive problem. We know how to do it. We don't have to invent anything. We have to train the workforce to do it. That's a little bit adaptive, but my friend Harrison here has told us we're in good hands, and we already have the tools that we need to do it, but we just need the funding. So this is about those of us who are policymakers and those of us who influence policymakers to say, we have to ensure that we're providing the funding that is needed to solve a technical problem and save lives, and end the impacts that we're seeing time and time again, particularly in low-income communities, in environmental justice communities, because we know how to do this, and there's no excuse not to do it. And we have a White House that understands that, and we've heard that when we've gone to the White House, and there is funding being put to this challenge to help to solve it, but we're going to need more. And there's no excuse for not doing it. So that's just my proselytizing for the day. And which button do I push? This one? Green. Okay. See, it's green for a reason. I thought, you know, I didn't touch it. So wait, I want to start, though, by saying that I'm sitting here, but the people who make me smart on this issue are our Commissioner Joe Coffey and Katie McKittrick, our engineer, who's here as well. And so I'll look at them and see whether I make any mistakes, and they can jump in and interrupt me if I do. Just to give a quick overview, we are a city of about 100,000. We have 27,000 water services. 12,000 of those are lead. How do we know that? Well, first of all, I want to start by saying, with respect to services that do sample above the 10 parts per billion, we do provide free water filters to those households as a stopgap measure. You know, we can't replace all of these pipes immediately, but we can provide filters, so we do that. We also provide testing, and there's free sampling that's available through the Department of Health. And we, you know, as my friend from Newburgh said, we're subject to these procedures around testing and having to do the inventory and knowing where those lead pipes are. And so, you know, our inventory program, this is what it used to look like. Right? Everything was on paper. We didn't really know how we were going to figure out where all of our lead pipes are. But what we've done is work with our community to streamline this process and to engage the community in helping us to find out whether they have a lead service. So we have a brochure. This is online. Residents can now submit. And so again, you know, doing all that we can to ensure that we're making it as easy as possible for us to do this inventory and to get an understanding of what that looks like. So, you know, this is what it looks like when somebody has notified us, and the inventory program has allowed us to, you know, literally map out where there are lead services, where there are partial lead services. So we've really drilled down because, again, oftentimes the lead is between our water main and the home. And so there's a portion of it that we've replaced in the past, but we didn't go all the way back in the day, and so there's a portion of that that's still a lead service. So we've really worked to drill down so that we understand exactly where the lead is. And then we've laid that out by ward because we want our common council members to know whether their ward is specifically impacted by larger numbers of lead services than others. We want them to have an understanding as they're out talking to people in the community to raise awareness on this, and then we lay it over the DEC's environmental justice mapper. We also look at where we have medically underserved communities and where we've also done a lot with lead paint. And just a little thing about lead paint, you know, we've been successful in getting millions and millions of dollars in HUD funding to remove lead paint. And to me, it never made sense that we weren't, when we were removing the paint, looking at the water. And so we do that now. When we're doing lead paint removal, we're going alongside with the water department to say, is this a lead water service? Let's fix everything now through the grant funding and other programs that we have. And so again, it's how do we look at this as holistically so that we can move as fast as possible to get these services replaced. We also have a grant program. Any lead service qualifies. Part of it is self-funded using our water and sewer rates. Part of it is we're able to use some of our American Rescue Plan funding, and we've also been able to get some grants. When we do major water and sewer excavation projects, we go in and replace all of the lead lines in conjunction with that. And we also now prohibit anybody from doing spot repairs or those partial replacements, which often can kick up even more lead and be more dangerous than just leaving everything alone. We did attend the Get Out the Lead Summit in 2023. And it was great to learn and really hear from a number of different communities about what they're doing and how they're doing it. And again, we have the issue of most of these being privately owned. And so working through how we can go in and quickly fund this and make this possible. We're just full steam ahead. To me, this is a public health emergency. And so, you know, to the point that we heard earlier from the legal opinions, I think we're going to move forward. And if someone wants to sue me, sue me. Yeah. So we've been able to do 1,100 lead replacements since 2019. We've issued grants for 593 of those. Those grants have totaled, we're approaching $1 million. And, you know, we are full steam ahead with respect to ensuring that we're doing all that we can to deal with what is an issue that it's been highlighted by challenges in the past. We've been below the lead thresholds forever, but we're now seeing that because of the way that we have to test and because of some of the formulas that we are subjected to, that we are going to be over the 15 parts per billion. We knew that we were going to be over the 10 when those go into effect. And in some ways, we're hopeful that that will place a huge exclamation point on the need for funding, which we've all been talking about here, because when we were in compliance, we were not really successful in being able to access some of the state and federal funding that's available out there, which is understandable, right? They're going to prioritize communities where they're out of compliance and you're seeing lead levels that are over what the EPA allows. But we're now, unfortunately, going to be moving into that non-compliance category, and we're hopeful that that will allow us to access funding so that we can accelerate this. Because there are a lot of justice issues, especially if we're using our own funding and ratepayers are paying for it. You know, you're basically punishing the community that's already been punished because they were formerly redlined, and you know, this issue has been allowed to exacerbate year over year over year. So we're continuing to do this work. I'm hopeful that we will complete it before the deadline, and maybe even be able to accelerate it even more. Because again, this is a technical problem. With the money, we can do this. And we have to be serious about advocating for the funding to get the lead out of our water. And I finished 25 seconds early.
So efficient. Last but maybe the most name-dropped person so far today, I want to welcome Rob Hayes from Environmental Advocates for New York.
Wonderful.
Welcome, Rob.
Thank you so much, Laura. And wonderful to be here with everybody today. And I just got to say, it is so great to be up here on the panel with especially mayors who are being so proactive on this issue and are taking this issue so seriously, along with both Gabrielle and Harrison, who are doing such amazing work on the community engagement and workforce development level. So as Laura said, I'm Rob Hayes. I'm the Director of Clean Water with Environmental Advocates New York. For those of you not familiar with our organization, we're a statewide nonprofit organization based here in Albany that advocates mostly for state-level policy change to protect public health and further environmental justice. So as my role as Director of Clean Water, we work a lot on issues of lead service lines and lead in drinking water. But it also means that we, every once in a while, get to go out into communities and help communities that are dealing with specific water pollution problems. And so that's how we got connected to Jana in Troy and to Gabrielle and the Newburgh Clean Water Project down there. And honestly, it's one of the most fun parts of the job. So kind of my talk today is about getting the lead out quickly and equitably. You know, we've heard today that there is now a proposal from the Biden administration that we have to get the lead out of drinking water. We have to replace these lead service lines. And I think as Assemblymember McDonald was saying earlier, now the question is all about implementation. How do we do this as quickly and as equitably as possible? And so my presentation today is largely going to focus on what are some of those policies that both local governments and the state government can adopt to do that work in exactly that way. And many of these policies you might have heard from Mayor Sheehan and Mayor Harvey, who are already doing a lot of this work on the ground. So let me start with this slide about advancing environmental and economic justice, because we've heard a lot about how this is an environmental justice issue and the economic justice potential of doing this work the right way. And really that first bullet point is all about kind of setting the baseline and the vision and the goal that I think we should have for 100% lead pipe replacement. And I have two words I think underlined and bolded there. First is that these replacements should be free lead service line replacements to residents, and that we need to eliminate all of these lead service lines. Marissa from Earthjustice, whose presentation was earlier, I think did a fabulous job laying out how important those free lead pipe replacements are and how cost sharing can sometimes lead to environmental justice concerns. So I won't dwell on that too much. But I will dwell a little bit on this word all, because one thing we haven't talked about too much, and this is something that some of our national partners have flagged who are looking very closely at the Biden administration LCRI proposal, is that there's a potential loophole in what the EPA is proposing. And it's all about kind of the definition of controlling a lead service line. And essentially what EPA is saying is that if a water utility doesn't control, quote unquote, that lead service line, they're not required to replace it. And they define that control by meaning both legal and physical access to that lead service line. And so there's a concern among the community that more kind of bad actors among water utilities or local governments say, might just say, oh, you know, we don't have access over this lead service line, therefore we have no requirement, no obligation to address that property and that problem. Because maybe they're charging people, you know, $4,000 or $5,000 to replace their half of that lead service line. If folks can't pay that, the water utility might just throw up their hands and say, oh, you know, that's no longer our problem. They're not providing us that legal and physical access to access that lead service line. And there's nothing proactive that the water utility has to do under EPA's LCRI to try and you know, change that kind of legal framework for access. So this is something we're hoping the federal government will address through the public comment process going on right now, but something that both local governments and I think the state government should absolutely be looking at and being proactive on. The other issue that's come up a lot today is about tenants and thinking about rental properties, because a lot of lead service lines are going to be found there, especially in those smaller 2 to 3 family kind of apartment buildings. Something that I think is really important, and we saw it work in Newark, New Jersey, is allowing other individuals other than the owner of that property or the water customer that pays the water bill for that building to be able to consent to that lead service line replacement. So, you know, a tenant, an adult non-owner occupant should be able to say, this is my home, this is the water that I drink every day. Yes, come on in, let's replace this lead service line. Because we are definitely concerned about this issue of absentee landlords, where even if the replacement is being offered for free, you know, that landlord might not care too much about those tenants, doesn't want to bother with the hassle of doing this work, and, you know, might never respond to those cities' attempts to try and get access to that property. You know, and I think especially this kind of works in conjunction with offering free lead service line replacements. You know, you are going to get consent much, much more easily if you're not putting any financial burden on that household. So those are kind of, I think, really critical points when thinking about policies to advance environmental and economic justice there. And maybe one other thing to mention before I go to the next slide is that offering free lead service line replacements will also make this work a lot more efficient, because it will be much more easy for kind of the workforces out on the streets to plan kind of whole block replacements and to make sure that they're not skipping houses or have to figure out which houses to go to as they're going along. This slide is all about kind of prioritizing the most vulnerable communities. And I'll mention too, all the photos that you'll see in this presentation are from the amazing advocacy and organizing that's been happening in Troy over the last year. And this is our wonderful colleague, Lena Hendrickson, tabling at the Troy Farmers Market just a couple of weeks ago. We've been going fairly regularly there to let folks know about kind of the programs that Troy has available. But you know, there's a lot of lead pipes to replace, and at the end of the day, we have to figure out who gets those lead pipes out of the ground first. And I think there's a couple of communities that should absolutely be prioritized in that process. Disadvantaged communities, I think, are near the top of that list. You know, we were talking today about how low-income communities and communities of color are facing so many environmental burdens, other social and economic burdens, and that, you know, given the enormous kind of risks that these populations are facing, getting the lead out of those properties is especially important. And I think there's also work that can be done with those homes where there are identified children with elevated blood lead levels. This is something that Troy's been looking at. I know there are potential complications with HIPAA and other kind of health privacy information, but you know, the more that communities can get access to those homes and know where those are, those might be instances where you really do just want to do a one home, one off replacement to say this is a property especially at risk. So let's talk about the efficiency angle of things. How do we replace more LSLs for less money, essentially? And some of these we've already heard from Mayor Harvey and Mayor Sheehan. You know, planning out lead service line replacements, I think, is incredibly important. You know, doing this block by block, rather than one home on a block, then you head to the next block to do another home, and you're bouncing around like that. It is so much more efficient when you can do those whole block replacements, go neighborhood by neighborhood when getting these pipes out of the ground. Equipment helps here too. I think Mayor Harvey was talking about the hydrovac equipment that can really make it much more easier to dig those holes into the ground, to kind of dig up these lead pipes. It requires a bit of an upfront investment from the locality, but that's going to pay real dividends when thinking about we have to replace all these pipes, you know, over the next number of years. And then we've also been hearing about kind of coordinating with other street kind of upgrades and repairs, other water infrastructure improvement projects. It makes a heck of a lot of sense to dig these pipes out of the ground when the street has already been dug up, rather than having to do that work twice over. And I think my final slide is to just kind of give a more detailed overview of exactly what program Troy is putting in place. We've heard the great programs from Newburgh and Albany now, but I think there are some really great things happening in Troy that we wanted to highlight, because they've got, you know, an estimated 4,000 lead pipes over there. So kind of what's their plan to get it out of the ground? First is that Troy is indeed offering free lead service line replacements to every single resident. And the new mayor, Carmelo Mantello, has promised to get all of that work done in the next 4 years. It's a big challenge, but it is feasible. We saw Newark, New Jersey do it in just 3 years. So like the mayor was saying, this is a technical problem that if the funding is there, the work can get done. Troy also adapted a new ordinance, and one of the things in this ordinance to facilitate this program is that property owners must consent to a free lead service line replacement, otherwise they will face potential penalties. This gives the ability for the city to say, you know, we're offering this for you for free, you have to say yes because we have to get this lead out of the ground. Troy's coordinating this work with a lot of their community development block grant projects. They're also targeting some of those EBLL homes, which is really good to see. They're using copper as a replacement material, which we as advocates definitely think of as the safest material. I think that's what's happening in many cities across the state, but we do know that there are some out there who are using materials like plastics, where there are questions and concerns about some of those materials. And finally, like in Albany, there's free filters being provided to residents, especially those who have to wait for that lead service line. So we really think this, along with, you know, the models in Albany and Newburgh, can really be a model for other cities to adopt and get this work done as quickly and equitably as possible. Troy's up to 48% customer reporting of their service line materials, which is great, but there's obviously more to do to get up to 100%. So looks like my time is up in the back, so thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Rob. I want to thank all of our panelists. I'll give everybody, I know we're a little over time, but we'll leave a little room for questions still. I'll give everybody a moment to think through what questions they want to ask, and just start off by kind of kicking back. We've talked about the issue of cities with high percentage of renters and the kind of home ownership issues around that, getting access to property. I'm wondering, not to put our lovely mayors on the spot here, but how are you assessing you know, the permission that you need to get onto the property? How are you prioritizing which properties, particularly rental properties, are addressed in your planning for lead service line replacements?
Yeah, if I could jump in, because I don't know if I made it clear, but in my presentation, the over 200 lead service lines that we've replaced were all for free, using the grant funding that we've received, you know, up until 1.8 million. And we have a process where we've done, you know, announcements to our residents. We've had postings and, you know, street teams and people in the community with the non-for-profits to you know, hand out leaflets. And so what happens is they call our water department. The water department will put them on the schedule, go out to their homes, do an assessment. I just recently had one done about 4 months ago, and gladly my line's copper. And then, you know, again, working with the Environmental Innovative Center, prioritizing the neighborhoods where people are at or below the margins, making sure that they are at priority with the communication, making sure that they are a priority with the testing, and if there is a lead service line, a water line, getting consent from the property owner and doing it for free. And as my colleague Mayor Sheehan has mentioned, and several other people, when we are doing, because we have over $100 million worth of infrastructural upgrades going on in Newburgh. We've dug 50-foot tunnels with micro tunnel machines, so we're not discharging the 54 million tons per year into the Hudson of untreated sewage. So while we're doing this infrastructural upgrade, we are also testing the water service lines so that we can replace them all at once. And some of that is with the grant funding and the bonding funds that we have available for infrastructure upgrades.
Yeah, I mean, we do have a model for this because the lead paint program that HUD funds does allow us to do work on, on rental properties. And so we have experience working with tenants, working with landlords with respect to those programs. But, I don't know, I'll look at Katie to see what her on the street experience has been like trying to work with landlords.
Yeah, we have,
I think there's
thanks. We adopted an agreement form. Basically, I've shared that with a lot of communities at this point in New York for them to model it after, and we modeled it after another community as well, and our law department helped us with that. So right now, we do require homeowner consent. We've been talking for a couple years about expanding that based on Newark's legislation, modeling ours after that for tenants to be able to sign for that. We do work really hard at getting a homeowner signature though, and I will say that for most of our block-wide replacement projects, Lark Street corridor from Madison to Washington being one of them, Washington being one of them, we didn't have a single homeowner refuse lead service replacement. So that entire corridor, 100 services, was replaced with homeowner consent. But it would be nice to expand that should we come up to a situation where we don't have homeowner consent or can't find them or get them to respond.
Very insightful. Thank you so much. I'll open it up to questions from the audience. I think we have time for one or two. Yes.
Point of clarity and potential follow-up for Director Hayes. Did I understand you correctly, and did you say that New Jersey mandated owners of residential properties to consent to replacement of lead service lines if that was offered by their municipality? Was that a state law reform?
So this was actually a municipal ordinance. So the city of Newark, New Jersey had a big kind of lead poisoning crisis several years ago where very high levels of lead were being detected in their drinking water. And after some amazing organizing and advocacy, the city decided we're going to replace 100% of Newark's lead pipes. The city council then, I believe, adopted an ordinance that allowed adult non-owner occupants like tenants to consent to a lead service line replacement. And I think the city really credits that at really speeding the process of doing a lot of those lead service line replacements. So as I think I might have mentioned earlier, I think Newark got about 23,000 lead service lines out of the ground in just 3 years. So yeah, that was kind of the city level that all that was happening under. We are seeing states adopt laws about lead service lines that might go beyond what the federal government is doing. There's a number of states that for several years now have actually already had lead service line replacement mandates in place, both New York, or not New York, I wish New York, New Jersey, Michigan, I think one or two others. So states can absolutely be playing more of a leadership role on this issue.
Is there viability or feasibility to extend that authority to municipalities to make that requirement for property owners?
You know, it's something we are looking at right now via state legislation, so we'll keep you posted.
Thanks.
Great. Any other questions? Yes.
Hi, Hi, Tamsin from Newburgh Clean Water Project as well. I had a kind of detailed question, particularly for the mayors. Mayor Sheehan, you mentioned that you were getting code enforcement to have a quick look and see what the water line supply was. I was wondering if you had, what the accounting is in terms of getting code enforcement involved in these lead line replacements might it present a hurdle to some of our lower income owners who do have code enforcement infractions? I know in Newburgh they're not eligible if there are code enforcement infractions, and in speaking with the community, a lot of people are afraid of getting code enforcement into their homes because they know there might be infractions.
Yeah, I mean, look, when I'm talking about code inspections, our residential occupancy permit program mandates that we lay eyes on any apartment. I think it's every 24 months. And that's for health and safety issues. And so it's not an option. So it's not a call to codes for a potential code violation. It's our way of ensuring that people are living in environments that are safe and habitable. So I think, given the significant health challenges that can be caused if a landlord is not maintaining a property appropriately, or if there are issues with lead, that we need to get